Welcome to Wise Guys.
Millennial insight in a changing America.
Today, we'll be talking about the Democratic Party and their path forward.
So, the Democratic Party had a pretty difficult 2016. The Republican Party won the executive, Senate, House, and a lot of different gubernatorial and local election seats across the country. I would say they swept the elections across the board. So it made February 25th, 2017's election for the chairperson of the Democratic National Committee a really important election. There were two main frontrunners. First, Tom Perez, Labor Secretary under President Barack Obama. Second, Keith Ellison, a U.S. representative and congressman from Minnesota. It was a really difficult race, and it ended up being a second-round ballot that went for former Labor Secretary Tom Perez. But interestingly enough, Perez's first action, minutes after becoming the new chairperson, was to ensure that there was a unanimous vote for Keith Ellison to become the deputy chairperson and deputy director, effectively, of the future of the party. That's really indicative for a few reasons. Keith Ellison had a lot of different support behind him, most notably Bernie Sanders and his progressive movement. Tom Perez, on the other hand, as a former member of the Barack Obama administration, was generally seen as an establishment candidate. What we basically saw was the Democratic Party trying to decide if it was a party of that progressive branch or the old Democrats for the future.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people set this up, kind of playing them against each other. And when Perez was actually questioned about that, he was kind of a little taken aback. I think he feels like he does represent the more progressive wing of the party. And we were talking before, and when you compare their resumes, there's actually a lot of
Pretty
similarity.
similar, yeah.
Right, in fields like civil rights, credit reform, and just kind of like, also like the legal background. I really don't see a whole lot of daylight between them.
No, and I think that's just really interesting, is that somehow Allison was seen as the progressive future. And even just yesterday, and very recently after the election was made, there was a lot of discussion about how, potentially this is indicative of the Democratic Party failing for the future because they are not recognizing the Bernie Sanders wing, the progressive wing. And I don't know if Wes and I necessarily agree with that. We think that there's a lot of similarities between both Perez and Allison, and those similarities mean that it doesn't have to be a fully divided party down the line. Perez's first action was to try and unify the party even further, and Allison said the same thing when he accepted the position of his deputy. He realized that the Democrats need to come together down the line in order to have any sort of advance forward against a really stunning defeat at the hands of the Republicans in 2016. If there isn't that unity and the Bernie Sanders wing isn't brought back into the Democratic Party, really there isn't going to be any way to move forward from effectively what's considered by a lot to be, the Debbie Wasserman-Schultz rigging of the DNC primaries in 2016 and Hillary's victory over Bernie being suspect in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, there's obviously some bad blood there, and I can see a lot how Sanders supporters would be pretty disappointed. But I think right now in the party, if you're a Democrat and you're looking at the party today, the party is more progressive or big L liberal than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than it was 10 years ago. A lot of those blue dog Democrats, the ones that were elected from red areas, they're gone. And really, it's the big cities on the coasts. Those are the big areas they're representing. And I see Perez's point of view. I just don't think, I think the media wanted to make it a story that this is the difference and they're fighting it. But we just see a lot more similarity between these guys. And they're both organized. I think they're both organizational guys because when you're looking at a chairman, you kind of got to look at their resume. And I think it's no mistake that these two guys are both put up. They both have similar backgrounds, and I think they'll probably both be pretty good at organizing.
Yeah, I do think that both would have been solid choices for the future, and this is a good team to have leading it. So I think we can agree that division isn't inherently the path forward. Very possible that the Bernie crowd is still upset about the way things are working and can choose to do that. But we think that would be a mistake. For Democrats to have a really strong future, they need to unify. And I guess that's one thing that I think is really worth mentioning, is that Perez really quickly came out and discussed what the Democratic plan forward would be. And it's kind of a response to what you just said, Wes. Wes makes a good point in that the Democrats have been representing the coastal cities and what's been called the coastal elites by a lot of Republican campaign and strategists. And it's time that changes. Perez said so as much. He admitted that the Democratic Party effectively forgot swaths of rural America. And the path forward for what he sees as the future of the DNC is going to be trying to ensure that that we're talking school board, we're talking city council, and state legislatures are their focus in the short term. That grassroots infrastructure is critical. It's what led Barack Obama to a 2009 sweep, and it's what the Democratic Party needs to do if it wants to remain as relevant and unified as possible in 2018 and the future, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of got to look at it from the mirror image. I mean, if we look on the Republican side, the Tea Party movement if it was kind of, downplayed at first, definitely. But that was a pretty genuine groundswell movement. And when that energy came out after the election of Obama, and really mostly as a response to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and once that movement came out, it was mated with money and resources, first from libertarian groups like the Koch brothers, and then from the actual Republican Party. And there was some internecine fighting. I mean, there was kind of a civil war.
I was going to say,
they hashed it out.
The Republican Party didn't really take the Tea Party movement seriously until they realized they had no other choice, And I think the progressive movement is following that similar model.
Well, we kind of have to see, because the Tea Party had to take down some establishment Republican incumbents, basically, and they did that. And especially when you look at 2010 elections, the Tea Party was net positive for the Republicans. So I think you kind of have to, if you're a Democrat and you're planning this out, you kind of got to see first where you're going to go. And I think you were right, that goal that Perez laid out is probably good, because we think what he's got in his mind is really the 2020 census.
Exactly, right. So, 2018, as anyone who's been paying attention to the way the election's going to work, is a really, really tough election for Democrats. In the House and Senate, about 2/3 of the available seats that are going to be up for a contest, are Democratic seats.
Right. It's a vulnerable cycle for them.
Very vulnerable cycle. So I think it's smart that Perez is realizing now's the time to start planning for 2020, a race that President Trump has already more or less indicated that he plans on running again. He has a slogan picked out and everything. We know that he's likely to be there. We know that the Republicans are riding a wave right now. And I think Perez and Allison need to be leading the party in an infrastructure grassroots movement. So they're building that infrastructure for that movement effectively. And the only way to do that, in my mind, is at the state level, at the local level. And it's not focusing on the House. It's not focusing on the Senate.
Right. I think one of their leadership challenges, it's going to be hard. Right now, who is the leader of the Democrats? You got Schumer in the Senate.
Right.
I don't know how charismatic he is. I mean,
interestingly, he also was behind Ellison.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of a split. I mean, you got Perez as the new chair.
Yeah.
I mean, Clinton is still out there.
She actually just came back with a video earlier, like a few days after the DNC chairperson was chosen, and made it clear that unity is the future and that she's still going to be involved in the Democratic Party.
Right. And you got to throw in Obama into the mix, and Sanders.
They're both there, yeah.
I mean, so that's going to be there. I think that they can still act as kingmakers in the party. They've got a lot of influence behind them, and what's going to be tough for the current leadership, which is really Senate Minority Leader, House Minority Leader, and DNC Chairman. Their challenge is going to be 2018, because most likely they're probably not going to do too well. So is their long-term strategy? I think it could come to fruition, but their supporters are going to need to be able to take a step back and 2018 and not kick them out.
Right. And I also think they're going to need to find a way to get their supporters to mobilize and capitalize on the marches that we've been seeing, which so far, whatever said and done, aren't a lot more than really good headlines.
Right.
The headlines are made, but the people that are reading the newspapers with the headlines are the same ones that voted Democrat, more or less, you know?
Right.
So for those marches to really matter, they can be a starting point, and they ought to be. And if that's what they are, then they're positive and they're successful. But if all the people that came out for the Women's March only stayed out for the Women's March and aren't involved in the grassroots politics of the Democratic Party in the future, I'm not sure that we'll see that large a change before 2018.
Right, and they need to turn protesters into candidates.
That's critical. Get those same people running for office.
And that's what the Tea Party did very successfully. And they ended up with a lot of good candidates. I mean, look at Rubio was around a little bit before that, but he harnessed that wave.
Absolutely.
And we also got Cruz.
Yeah,
I mean,
Cruz did it.
Those are huge names now.
Yeah.
And they both ran for president.
Exactly.
So the Democrats got to harness this energy and take it to the next level.
So
at the states.
Absolutely. And
Like
it's important also to think about what the Republican response for the Allison Perez showdown was. And one response in particular was rather interesting. President Trump came out pretty quickly and congratulated Perez for winning chairperson, and then afterwards said that the only person he's happier for is the Republican Party, indicating that he thinks Perez is going to be a rather divisive figure within the Democratic Party. And soon after that, also tweeted that, Allison never stood a chance. And just like Bernie, the whole thing was rigged against Ellison. And I think that's pretty strategic from the president's point of view, ensuring there's still chaos within the Democratic Party. And I think it's going to be left up to the Democrats and Perez and Ellison to determine exactly how well they can unify and if they can create momentum forward rather than falling back on old wounds.
I think one of the big challenges, talking about that, specifically how the Democrats have with Trump is, first of all, and in statements, especially from the progressive wing, they've said that they don't want to focus on Trump too much.
Right.
And I think for them, that's probably the best way to go. I mean, I don't think they want to run an anti-Trump campaign, especially against an incumbent president.
Yeah.
They want to run a pro-Democrat or pro-whatever their ideas campaign is. And the other thing, while at the same time, I don't think they can focus on Trump too much, I also think that they can't underestimate him. I mean,
they did once already, right?
Well, they did once already, and that didn't turn out too well. When you mention Trump, I mean, let's just be honest. When you mention Trump to, let's say, a more progressive, just any day person, I mean, they will go on a rant. I mean, his ability to get them inside their own head, I think, is pretty high.
And I guess the difference is, what do those rants and those social media posts anti-Trump from a lot of the progressives and Democrats do, and what do they accomplish? And I think it's more or less nothing, right? And
unless
that's
they
the
can
difference.
harness it.
Exactly. So it comes down to harnessing that raw anger and that passion and turning it into something productive at the grassroots level. And I think what you said is exactly right. The Democrats' path future and what it needs to do to really harness that wave is to ensure that people are running at a grassroots level and ensure it's focusing on more than just Washington, D.C. Right. Because the focus on D.C., in my mind, is what lost them 2016.
Right. Their terrain in D.C. right now is not favorable to them.
No.
So they must fight where it's more favorable.
Absolutely. As always, feel free to leave us any comments, questions, or suggestions on things that we should tackle next. And we appreciate you listening. This has been The Wise Guys.